Today we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors. We're taking a look at some RFAs that could be on the move or possibly not even qualified. Plus, we're going to be taking a look at some trade talk around the Carolina Hurricanes. Plus, is Mark Scheifele maybe staying in Winnipeg after all? We have some more signings, injury updates, and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. First up, let's recap last night's Game 1 of the Western Conference Final. An incredibly exciting, highly entertaining game. The Avalanche and the Oilers did put on a show, and that is if you like offense, you like goals. Well, you got 14 of them with an 8-6 victory for the Avalanche. There wasn't a whole lot of awesome saves or stellar defensive plays, but the offense and the speed was on high display last night. That much is for sure. We've seen all four goaltenders participate in the game. On the Edmonton side, Smith was pulled and Koskinen came in, and actually Koskinen did relatively well, I must say. He did allow a few, but probably played better than Smith, to be honest. When it comes to Darcy Kemper, though, in Colorado, he was pulled due to injury. He pulled himself, saying he couldn't go, and all we know, it was an upper body injury. Jared Bednar didn't say a whole lot after the game. I kind of wonder and hope if it's not something to do with the previous eye injury that he had returned from the other series there when he got the stick and threw his mask in the eye, because it's not really clear. There wasn't anything too obvious what happened. I know myself, the game had gone to commercial. I had taken a quick break. I was away from the TV for just a couple of moments. I came back and Francouz was in the net, and I'm just like, wow, what happened here? And it really wasn't too obvious. There wasn't a whole lot of talk on the broadcast, except that he was had some sort of upper body injury and was unlikely to return. So we don't know exactly what the immediate future holds here for Kemper. Bednar did say it was possible he could play next game, but he didn't confirm anything, so we don't really know. I think it's also fair to say that Darnell Nurse is definitely, dealing with an injury. It was a little bit more obvious last night. I believe it's some sort of like a core muscle injury or something, but you could tell that the way he's moving out there, that he didn't appear to be 100%, and it was certainly the Avalanche speedy players were kind of taking advantage of that. Of course, we saw a very, I guess you could call it a controversial goal, even though it really shouldn't have been. The Cale Makar goal, which was the third goal right at the end of the first period. I know many people thought it was offside, and it wasn't. And most people who think it was offside don't understand the rule. I know when it first happened, and I first saw the replay, my first instinct too was, oh, that's offside, it's coming back. But after looking at it again and thinking of the rules, then it was, okay, yes, it makes sense. Once Makar pushes the puck over the blue line, he doesn't have it on his stick. So until he touches it, that would be when the play could be offside if his teammate is not tagged up yet, but he was. So it was certainly a play that a lot of people are arguing over today, and I don't really think at the end of the day would have made a lot of difference. Now, had the goaltender made a save, we wouldn't even be talking about it, but obviously it's one of those things, and we've seen numerous examples since then as well of other goals that also were the same sort of thing. I think the players seem to understand it, because I've seen probably at least 3 or 4 good examples just from the past couple seasons of players doing the same thing, pushing the puck over the line, waiting for their teammate to tag up, and then touch the puck, and then you're good. So obviously, it's not much of a controversy in my opinion. And you know what? Even if the people think the rules should be different, well, that's a conversation for another day and for having things change for the future. As it stands today, that is the rule, and it was called correctly in my opinion. So it was an awesome game, though, and we'll see where the series goes. Remember, for Oilers fans especially, they lost the first game against the Flames, and it was a very high-scoring affair. And then they took over from there, and they still had some high-scoring games, but they came out victorious in all of them. So obviously the Oilers are by no means out of this series. They still scored 6 goals in loss, which is bad, but it shows you that they can score. So if they can tighten up defensively and figure out a way to slow down that Avalanche speed a little bit, then they'll have a better chance. So we'll see where things go in Game 2. Game 1 obviously goes tonight between the Lightning and the Rangers. That should be an interesting series. I don't expect anywhere near the goals. That should be a goalie battle between Vasilevsky and Igor Shesterkin. So we'll see. By the time this video makes it to YouTube, that game should be either just getting started or they're very close to that. So it should be another fun game, but it's going to be more of a defensive battle here in my opinion. We do get several signings to talk about today. The St. Louis Blues extended defenseman Calle Rosen. He gets a 2-year, two-way deal, $750,000 at the NHL level. Of course, he was set to be pending UFA, and wasn't quite clear what his future was going to be with St. Louis, but they've taken care of that here immediately. They do have some other big question marks to face here in the offseason, like Ville Husso and David Perron, etc., but this was probably a much simpler deal to get completed. The Buffalo Sabres have signed one of their top prospects as well, 2021 first-round pick Isaac Rosen, who's a Swedish right winger, 19 years old, played this past year over in the SHL. Yet another good-looking prospect coming for Buffalo. It seems like their prospects, of many of them, have really flourished this year between the younger players that graduated to Buffalo and even the ones that are still playing in the American Hockey League. Like they are going to be having a really good team, I think, in a few years. They're finally going to come out of this rebuild and be competitive. There's just too many good kids there that are just too talented, in my opinion. Time will be on their side here in the not too distant future. We also saw a signing in Arizona. They've signed an undrafted defenseman out of the Czech Republic. He's a little bit older, more mature, 27 years old, so he gets a 1-year deal. He's 6'4", 207 pounds. Ronald Knott is his name, K-N-O-T. Played last year in the KHL, so he certainly has the experience, the size, so we'll see how he fits in Arizona and whether or not he gets into the NHL or ends up having to play in the American Hockey League first. We'll see on that front. Not a player I'm really overly familiar with. The Anaheim Ducks on a 22-year-old UFA out of Europe as well. Pavel Regenda, who also gets a 2-year ELC, plays both wings. He's 6'4", 212 pounds. Could be a very interesting winger for the Ducks. I mean, we'll see what he can do at the NHL level, but certainly no harm, no risk involved with that kind of contract. Of course, we also got word today the Carolina Hurricanes spoke a little bit more after losing out at the end of the season here. Freddie Andersen finally revealed what the injury was that he was dealing with, and apparently it was a torn MCL, and so that's a little bit more serious than a lot of people thought. There's a lot of people that talked about Andersen being one of those guys that's really careful to return. He's kind of had a bit of a reputation. He's not a guy who would typically play through injuries, but that is a little bit more severe and significant than I think a lot of people realize. Apparently, he was very, very close to being able to return, and had they been able to advance, I think there's a good chance we would have seen Freddie Andersen here in the next round, or at least he would have been officially available. Could have been at least backing up, depending on what happened with Ranta. If Ranta hadn't got hurt, it's obviously a whole different scenario. Hard to say how everything could have played out there, but we'll never know. But certainly that injury was more serious than many of us thought. I know when it comes to Braden Point, there were some that were thinking maybe he'll play either tonight or in this series for Tampa. He has been spotted skating, but I think a lot of people are maybe getting a little bit too ahead of themselves based on comments from Coach John Cooper. It sounds like it's not a guarantee at all that he'll play in this series or even in these playoffs again. It might be next year before he can make the comeback, but the fact that he's skating is a positive, but it doesn't mean he's anywhere near ready to return. So I think they should pump the brakes on getting excited for Point to make his triumphant return to the lineup. Of course, we saw today as well, Martin St. Louis is officially named the 32nd head coach for the Montreal Canadiens. The interim tag is no more. He gets a 3-year contract to work as the head coach for the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, I do have a dedicated video on the channel from earlier today, which I will put up in the YouTube cards if you want my full thoughts and a little bit more of a discussion on that topic. But that is officially a done deal. Now, on to the rumor section of the video. I want to take a look at some RFA news. Now, Elliotte Friedman is talking today in the 32 Thoughts podcast, and he's mentioned this once before a few days ago, that he feels that this year the UFA group might be even more extensive than we thought, and there could be a case of some restricted free agents that are not qualified, because if you don't get your qualifying offer, you become UFA. The qualifying offer, of course, is based off your previous contract, and there are some players that that makes sense why teams would be a little hesitant to want to give them their qualifying offer, because if they accept that, they're going to be stuck paying that to them. Now, if players really, performed greatly less than what they feel that value is, they can appeal that in arbitration. It's not a common thing you see, but a team can take a player to arbitration over their qualifying offer. That is a possibility, but not a common occurrence. However, he feels that there's a lot of players that are going to become UFAs, or of course, you got to remember, before that ever happens, qualifying offers aren't due for a while. Like some of these RFAs, I don't really think that teams would like to turn them into a UFA and lose them for nothing. I would think they would try to trade them if they can, and maybe they'll be willing to accept contracts below what their qualifying offers. There's always that possibility too. But names that have been mentioned and some RFAs to watch that teams may not be real thrilled about qualifying include Dylan Strome in Chicago, Ethan Bear in Carolina, and Kasperi Kapanen in Pittsburgh. Now, when it comes to Dylan Strome, there's been all kinds of talk about him really for quite some time. Friedman mentions that, of course, under former coach Jeremy Colleton, he was not playing well, and there was a lot of talk he was going to get moved. Never happened, but I believe based on what he said, there was lots of conversations around it. They just never found the right trade. But then he did play better under Derek King. But of course, right now, we don't even know if Derek King's going to be back with Chicago next year or what their future holds. They haven't really been clear on exactly what they're doing. So he feels there could be a lot of potential change in Chicago, and Strome could be one of those players. So certainly, if they're unable to trade him before the qualifying offer has to be issued, he could end up possibly becoming a UFA. When it comes to Ethan Bear, he's a player that Friedman mentions that might not even want to be in Carolina anymore. He was a healthy scratch the entire playoffs, didn't get into one game, and really, I think for the earlier in the year, it looked like he was going to be a solid member of their top four, but of course they continue to play guys like Ian Cole and Brendan Smith ahead of them in the lineup, and I understand they have experience, they have grit, I get all that, and I can see why Brendan Moore might choose to do that, but that's really not, in my opinion, the purpose of why Bear was brought in. And at this point, I think it's been a frustrating year for him, and it wouldn't be shocking if he would be open to moving on. But at the same time, Smith and Cole are also UFAs, so we don't know if the team intends to try to bring them back or not. And if they don't, then they might need a defenseman anyways. But how does Bear feel all about that? Because, of course, he needs a new contract, so he does have a bit of leverage here. So we'll see what happens, but Ethan Bear could be a name to watch for as well. I think he could be an interesting addition to a lot of teams out there. I think the guy can play more than he sometimes gets credit for. And then, of course, with Kapanen in Pittsburgh, it's pretty clear and obvious there that they've been frustrated with his inconsistencies. I've mentioned it before that his name has surfaced in the rumor mill even at the deadline. His name was out there as a player that if they needed to subtract off the roster to make the team better for the playoffs, he was a guy they were willing to move. And now he's a guy that might not even get qualified. But considering what they gave up for him a couple of years ago, I would think they would try to trade him if possible. Even if the return is not fabulous, it's better than zero. So we will see what happens, but certainly some names to watch on the RFA front, and there's bound to be others as well. Those are just some of the more prominent names that Friedman brought up on the podcast today. Of course, Mark Scheifele and the Winnipeg Jets centerman, obviously one of their longtime great players, been in rumor mill really since near the end of the season that he very well might want to trade, and that even if he hasn't officially requested it, the Jets might look to make a move either way. And now that seems to be maybe not so much the case. Now, according to GM Kevin Cheveldayoff, and I'll say this again, I say it all the time, you cannot take everything that general managers or even players say to the public at full face value, because they're going to say what they're expected to say, and they don't want to ruffle any feathers, and they don't want other teams to really know their intentions, because it can hurt trade value. So it's just that simple. You can't, if a GM comes out and says, yeah, I'm not going to trade that guy, it really doesn't mean anything. How many times have you seen it, and then a few weeks later the guy is gone? It happens all the time. But he did say that he fully suspects that Mark Scheifele will be in their roster and on their lineup next season. So that certainly makes it sound like he's a lot more optimistic about it. Obviously nothing has surfaced through the insiders that Scheifele wanted to trade. He said they had a good exit interview to kind of talk about everything, and feels that things are in a better place. And I think that he feels Scheifele's more content to continue playing in Winnipeg. I mean, he didn't say he wanted out, but he did make it sound like he was very concerned about himself and his own career, was concerned about the direction of the team, etc., which you can understand. But there's also been a lot of talk about some locker room issues in that team, and some people kind of pointed the finger at comments made by Paul Stastny that maybe it's Scheifele they're talking about, and maybe it might be best if the team try something different here and move on if it's best for the team. But only time will tell on that. Of course, Pierre-Luc Dubois is also a restricted free agent. They need to sign him. And there's been some talk from Elliotte Friedman as well, saying that if they can't come to terms on a long-term deal, that they may consider trading him, but obviously they're not going to want to trade both their top two centers. I don't really think they would really want to trade either player, but certainly this year was not a successful season for them. They do need to make some changes. There's no doubt about it. And I would hope Scheifele would be, inclined enough to know whether or not there is a locker room problem, and if moving a guy like Scheifele is going to really improve the team that much from the morale standpoint, so to speak, that he would do the right thing for the team. But we'll see. But right now, it seems like there's a better chance that he stays. But again, like I said, you can't take everything at face value. I still wouldn't be shocked if they did consider a trade if the right deal comes along, but it seems less likely now than it did before. And of course, the Carolina Hurricanes recently eliminated from the playoffs. There's been some talk surfacing on what they may plan to do in the offseason, and do have some tough decisions like many teams. They have guys like Vincent Trocheck, Nino Niederreiter, and Tony DeAngelo need new contracts. Throw Max Domi into there as well. Of course, I already talked about Ethan Bear a little bit. When it comes to the UFAs, so Trocheck, Niederreiter, and Domi, I think to some degree there might be appetite to possibly bring them all back, but it's not going to be easy to do, of course. Vincent Trocheck has already publicly expressed his interest to return, so we'll see what happens. Of course, being a number 2 center, like if they don't have Trocheck back, who takes that role? That's questionable. And Niederreiter's 29, but certainly seems to fit well there. But the Carolina Hurricanes also, Rod Brendamore's comments after losing in Game 7 to the Rangers, like they kind of come to the conclusion here that maybe they need more of an elite scorer. Like they have lots of good and great players. I don't know they have much in the way of elite players. I mean, Sebastian Aho and Andrei Svechnikov is as close as it comes, and they are really good players, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't hurt if they had a little bit more of a pure goal scorer to go along with that. I mean, Svechnikov, I think someday will be a solid 40-plus goal guy. I think he can get there, but it's going to obviously take more than one guy who can put the puck in the net. They just need another winger, in my opinion, who can really help them score a little bit more frequently. It's just that simple. So could we see all these UFAs come back? It's going to be tough to bring in anybody else if they're all back. Will Tony DeAngelo come back? I mean, obviously that's a good fit for him. I would recommend he probably try to make that work if he can, but at the same time, he's going to be looking for way more money after playing on a cheap deal to rebuild his image. So hard to say, but he had a really good year production-wise, right? But could they look to a guy like Kevin Fiala or a Patrick Laine? I mean, Fiala is definitely more likely available. I don't have information to suggest that Laine is available, but it wouldn't shock me possibly if they consider that, because there's certainly some questions on his future and where things stand. And maybe he signs in Columbus. I wouldn't, I think it's less likely that he moves than Fiala, but a guy like Fiala might be a good fit there. Of course, fellow countryman Niederreiter, also from Switzerland, so that matters to him at all. And they have some really good players, but a guy who might be used possibly as trade bait if they need to might be Marty Necas. I mean, I think he had a decent season, but not great, not a great playoff at all. Didn't score any goals. It looks like maybe lacking some confidence there. And even though he's through his entry level deal now, he needs a new deal. He's on RFA coming up, and Necas is a good player, but I think that he's not really near his possible ceiling yet, and is not quite turning out to be the player they were hoping for. The guy needs to shoot the puck, plain and simple. Like in Game 7 when against the Rangers, like he had a prime spot in the slot to shoot, and he passed it up to pass to Svechnikov, who wasn't even expecting the pass. He needs to shoot that puck, and if he scores there, which is a prime opportunity, that may change the game. It's just that simple. I mean, I'm not saying for sure they're going to trade Necas, but I just think if they do want to bring in another proven scorer, that he might be a player, along with a guy like Ethan Bear, that maybe they package up and try to do that. It's hard to say, but obviously, they have a lot of players, a lot of decisions that need to be made, and whether or not to bring in a different player to help out and change up the mix and add some more offense, sounds like it could be something that at least Brindamore feels that they definitely need, which I wouldn't disagree with. So let me know your thoughts and everything discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.